Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is my story, one I never thought I'd share, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. What happened to me changed everything I believed in about love, trust, and betrayal. So here it goes. The first hint that our anniversary trip to paradise was already a shipwreck came subtly, not with a bang, but with a sickening lurch in my gut that had nothing to do with the turbulence on the flight into Cancun. It was in the way Nancy, my wife of 15 years, clutched her phone a little too tightly, the screen angled away from me with a practiced casualness that suddenly felt anything but casual. I'd been trying to show her a picture I'd snapped of the coastline as we descended, the turquoise water bleeding into pristine white sand, the very picture of the escape we both supposedly craved. She'd offered a cursory glance, a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then an immediate return to whatever urgent business awaited on that glowing little rectangle. I remember thinking, even then, just a fleeting thought, like a cloud obscuring the sun for a brief second, that for someone who'd claimed to want to disconnect, she was remarkably tethered. That was the overture, the quiet, unsettling music playing before the curtain rose on the full-blown horror show. We'd been married for 15 years, Nancy and I. 15 years. That's a lifetime, isn't it? We met in college. She was studying art history. I was wrestling with engineering. Opposites attract, or so they say. She was vibrant, a whirlwind of passion and laughter, and I was the steady, quiet one. I grounded her. She made me fly. It worked, or at least, I thought it did. We built a life. A comfortable home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, 2 cars in the driveway, a golden retriever named Max who was probably more loved than any human child we never had. We didn't have kids, a decision we'd mutually, if somewhat regretfully, arrived at years ago. Career focuses, timing, the usual excuses that pile up until a biological clock just sort of fades into the background hum of everyday life. Maybe that was part of the problem, a silent crack in the foundation I'd been too blind or too complacent to notice. The last few years, if I'm being brutally honest with myself now, had seen a slow drift. Not a contentious one, filled with arguments or obvious discontent, but more of a quiet erosion. The laughter wasn't as frequent, the shared glances less knowing, the casual touches less casual. We were roommates, good friends even, who shared a bed and a mortgage. The passion had cooled. I knew that. I tried, in my own fumbling way, to reignite it. Date nights, little gifts, suggesting new things. This trip, this expensive, all-inclusive, 5-star resort in Mexico, was supposed to be the grand gesture. A chance to reconnect, to find that spark again under a different sky, warmed by a different sun. It was my idea, mostly. Nancy had been distant, preoccupied. Stressed with work, she'd said. Her job at the marketing agency had become increasingly demanding, or so she claimed. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences, hushed phone calls she'd taken in another room. I'd accepted it all. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? 15 years. You don't just throw that away on a whim. You don't just suspect the worst of the person you've shared your life with. Or maybe you do, and I was just a fool. The resort was everything the brochure promised. Sprawling, luxurious, an oasis of manufactured perfection. Palm trees swayed in a gentle, warm breeze, the scent of salt and jasmine hung in the air. Our suite was magnificent, private balcony, a jacuzzi tub, a king-sized bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. For a moment, checking in, seeing the delight in Nancy's eyes, or what I interpreted as delight, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe we'd find our way back. That hope lasted precisely until the evening of our second day. We were heading to one of the resort's fancier restaurants, a beachfront place that required reservations months in advance. I'd pulled strings, called in favors, wanted everything to be perfect. Nancy looked stunning. She wore a flowing, sapphire blue dress that matched her eyes, the ones I'd fallen in love with. She'd spent a long time getting ready, an unusual amount of time, I now realize. There was an anxious energy about her, a restlessness I chalked up to excitement. As we walked through the open-air lobby, heading towards the restaurant path, she paused. "Oh, I forgot my wrap in the room," she said, her voice a little too bright. "It might get chilly later. You go ahead. Get us a good table by the water. I'll be right there." I frowned. "I can come with you, honey. No rush." She waved me off, a quick, dismissive gesture. "No, no, it's fine. I'll be quick. Go on." There was that phone again, clutched in her hand. I hesitated, a weird feeling washing over me. Something felt off, but I dismissed it. This was Nancy. My Nancy. I was being paranoid. So, I nodded, gave her a smile, and headed towards the restaurant. I found the maitre d', mentioned our reservation, and was led to a perfect table, just as requested, overlooking the ocean as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was idyllic, romantic, and I sat there, alone, for a good 20 minutes. 20 minutes isn't an eternity, but when you're waiting for your wife who said she'd be right there, in a place like this, it starts to feel long. I messaged her. "Everything okay? Got the best table?" No reply. I called. It went straight to voicemail, which was odd. She always had her phone on, ringer usually blaring. I was starting to feel a knot tighten in my stomach. Maybe she wasn't feeling well? Maybe she'd tripped? My mind, always the engineer, started cycling through possibilities, mostly mundane, some tinged with a nascent worry. Then I saw him. Or rather, I saw them. Not clearly at first. Just two figures walking along the beach, away from the direction of our room, further down where the resort lights faded into a more secluded stretch of sand. They were holding hands. The woman's dress, the same sapphire blue as Nancy's, caught the last rays of the dying sun. My breath hitched. It couldn't be. Coincidence, right? Lots of women own blue dresses. Lots of couples hold hands on the beach. But the way she moved, the tilt of her head as she laughed at something the man said, it was so achingly, sickeningly familiar. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the stone patio, earning a few curious glances from other diners. I didn't care. I started walking, then almost running, towards the beach, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mind was a screaming cacophony of denial and a horrifying, dawning certainty. As I got closer, they stopped, turning to face the ocean, his arm now around her waist, pulling her close. He leaned down to kiss her, a long, lingering kiss. And then she turned her head slightly, her profile illuminated by the faint glow from a distant tiki torch. It was Nancy. There was no doubt, no mistaking her. My wife, kissing another man, on our anniversary trip. The trip that was supposed to save us. The world tilted. The beautiful sunset suddenly looked garish and mocking, and the sound of the gentle waves crashing on the shore felt like a deafening roar, drowning out the last vestiges of the life I thought I knew. The initial shock was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs, leaving me staggering on the edge of the manicured resort path, the sand just beyond my dress shoes feeling like miles of treacherous terrain I couldn't possibly cross. My legs felt like lead, my vision tunneled, focusing only on Nancy and this stranger who had his hands all over my wife. The man was tall, lean, dressed in casual linen pants and a loose shirt, resort chic, I guess you'd call it. He had that easy confidence about him, the kind that always made me feel a little inadequate, even before I knew he was sleeping with Nancy. For a few seconds, or maybe it was minutes, I just stood there, frozen, watching them. They were oblivious, lost in their own little world, a world I had clearly not been invited to, despite footing the bill for its picturesque setting. The anger, when it finally broke through the ice of disbelief, was a volcanic eruption. Hot, molten rage that seared through my veins, making my hands clench into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. How could she? After everything? 15 years reduced to a sordid cliche on a Mexican beach. My first instinct was to charge down there, to scream, to hit something, to confront them in a blaze of righteous fury. But then, a different, colder thought slithered into my mind. What would that achieve? A scene? Security called? Them playing the victims, perhaps, or her denying it, him smirking? No. I needed. I didn't know what I needed, but it wasn't a public meltdown that would end with me looking like the lunatic. I backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows of the palm trees, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. I needed to think. I needed to understand how this could even be happening. Had I been that blind? That stupid? The memories started to flood in, each one now tinged with a sickening new light. The late nights at work. Were they really work? The hushed phone calls, business, or pillow talk. The increasing distance, the subtle withdrawal. Was it stress? Or was it guilt and a waning interest in me because she had someone else? The pieces of the puzzle, so innocuous on their own, were now assembling themselves into a grotesque image of betrayal. The vacation itself. Had she planned this? Had she known he would be here? The thought made me physically ill. Was this whole trip, my grand gesture of reconciliation, just a convenient rendezvous for them? The elaborate cruelty of it was breathtaking. I stumbled back towards our suite, my legs unsteady. The vibrant colors of the resort, the happy chatter of other guests, the romantic music drifting from a nearby bar, it all felt like a personal insult, a mocking soundtrack to my private hell. When I got back to the room, it was empty. Her wrap, the supposed reason for her return, lay discarded on the bed. Her phone was gone. Of course it was. She wasn't coming back soon. She was with him. I paced the room like a caged animal, the luxurious surroundings feeling like a gilded prison. I replayed the scene on the beach over and over in my mind. The kiss. The way he held her. The way she looked at him. It was a look I hadn't seen from her in years, if ever. A look of adoration, of passion. A look she certainly hadn't given me. Hours passed. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pack my bags and leave, just walk out and never look back. Another part, the part that still foolishly clung to 15 years of shared history, wanted to wait, to hear her explanation, to see if there was any possible way this wasn't as horrific as it seemed. But how could it not be? I saw them. Around 11 p.m., I heard a keycard in the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I positioned myself in the dim light of the living area, my arms crossed, waiting. Nancy walked in, a picture of breezy innocence, or so she tried to project. "Oh, there you are," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "I am so sorry. I started feeling really unwell, a terrible headache. I took some medicine and just crashed on the bed. I must have fallen asleep. I feel awful for ruining dinner." She didn't look unwell. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She looked energized, and she smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine. "You were asleep?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "In the room." "Yes, like a log," she said, avoiding my gaze, busying herself by taking off her earrings. "I just woke up a little while ago and realized how late it was. Per you, waiting all that time. The lies. So blatant. So insulting. Did she really think I was that much of an idiot?" "Funny," I said, "because I didn't see you in the room when I came back an hour after you left. Or the hour after that." Her hand froze midway to her ear. She finally looked at me, a flicker of something, fear, in her eyes before it was quickly masked. "What are you talking about?" "I was here. Maybe you just missed me?" "I was deeply asleep. Deeply asleep, or deeply engaged down on the South Beach with another man. Nancy?" The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Her face went pale, utterly, completely white. The breezy act shattered into a million pieces. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I was on the beach?" "Yes, you were," I said, stepping closer. Holding hands, kissing him. For quite a while, actually. You seem to be having a much better time than you would have had with me at dinner." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No denial came, not a real one anyway. Just a deer-in-the-headlights stare. "Who is he, Nancy?" I demanded, the anger finally starting to boil over, my voice rising. "Who is the man you're sharing our anniversary trip with?" She sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping. The fight, if there ever was one in her, seemed to drain away, replaced by a look of weary resignation. It's complicated, Mark," she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse, not yet. They felt like tears of someone who'd been caught. "Complicated?" I scoffed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "It looks pretty simple from where I'm standing. You're cheating on me. You brought your lover to our anniversary vacation. Is he staying here? At this resort? Did you plan this? The two of you?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at her hands, now twisting in her lap. "His name is David," she said, her voice barely audible. "And yes, he's staying here." The confirmation, though expected, hit me like another punch. David. So he had a name. He was real. This nightmare was real. ING here. The confirmation, though expected, hit me like another punch. David. So he had a name. He was real. This nightmare was real. The casualness with which she admitted his presence at the resort was astounding. It was as if she was discussing a minor social faux pas, not a betrayal of epic proportions. The air in the room crackled with unspoken accusations, with years of unspoken resentments now bubbling to the surface. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. She hadn't just been unfaithful, she had orchestrated a scenario so cruel, so disrespectful, it beggared belief. This wasn't a mistake, a momentary lapse of judgment. This was a calculated deception. My initial shock was slowly, but surely, morphing into a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't going to gaslight me. She wasn't going to cry her way out of this. The vacation was ruined, that much was clear. But the question now was, what about our marriage? What about our life? And what about David? The sheer audacity of him being here, in the same space meant for me and Nancy, fueled a different kind of anger. It was one thing to be cheated on. It was another to be so flagrantly disrespected, to have my intelligence insulted so profoundly. The depth of her deceit was still unfurling, each revelation a fresh wound. How long had this been going on? Who was this David? Was he a colleague? A friend? Someone I knew? The questions swirled in my head, demanding answers she seemed unwilling or unable to provide immediately. She just sat there, a portrait of defeated guilt, yet offering no real explanation, no profound apology, just the bare, brutal facts of her betrayal. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by her occasional sniffle. I looked at the woman on the bed, the woman I had loved for half my life, and I felt like I was looking at a stranger. The warmth I once felt for her had been extinguished, replaced by a chilling emptiness and a burgeoning desire for something. Not just answers. Not just an apology. Something more. Something that would make them understand the magnitude of what they had done. The night was far from over. In fact, it felt like the beginning of a very long, very dark journey. And as I stood there, watching Nancy crumble, a plan, vague and unformed but undeniably present, began to coalesce in the recesses of my shattered mind. This wasn't just going to be about my pain. It was going to be about their reckoning. The confession, if you could even call it that, was a pathetic trickle of information extracted from Nancy like pulling teeth. Each word a fresh stab to my already bleeding heart. David, she eventually admitted, was a senior partner from the London office of her marketing firm. His full name, David Kensington. He was older, divorced, supposedly charming and worldly. Their affair had started 6 months prior, during a conference in Chicago. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of clandestine meetings, of me playing the oblivious fool while she lived a double life. The late nights, the work trips, the emotional distance, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He was in Cancun for a conference too, a complete fabrication, of course. She'd known he was going to be here. In fact, they loosely coordinated it. Not this specific resort initially, she claimed, but when I'd suggested the Riviera Maya, she'd subtly steered me towards this particular one, knowing he could easily book a room here as well. It was a contingency, a happy coincidence if it worked out, and if not, well, she was still on a luxury vacation. The callousness was astounding. Our anniversary trip, my attempt to salvage our dying marriage, was merely a backdrop for her sordid little adventure. I asked her if she loved him. She hesitated, looking down at her hands again, before whispering, "I don't know. It's different. He makes me feel alive." Alive. As if I had been slowly suffocating her. The accusation, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. Maybe I had. Maybe our comfortable routine had become a gilded cage for her, and I, in my steady, predictable way, had been the oblivious zookeeper. But did that justify this? This level of deceit? This cruel charade? No, nothing could justify it. I felt a strange detachment then, a cold calm settling over the inferno of my initial rage. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a desolate landscape and a chillingly clear sense of purpose. I wasn't going to scream anymore. I wasn't going to break down. Not in front of her, anyway. She'd had her tears. I was done with mine, for now. "So, David Kensington," I said, the name feeling foreign and vile on my tongue. "Does he know you're married?" Nancy nodded mutely. "And he doesn't care?" He says it's my decision to make. That he'll support me whatever I choose." How noble of him. The support of a fair partner. The homewrecker with a heart of gold. That hypocrisy was nauseating. The rest of that night was a blur of strained, painful conversation. I asked questions. She gave reluctant, often evasive answers. She swore this wasn't how she wanted me to find out, that she was confused, that she was sorry for the pain she was causing. Standard lines, I suppose, from the cheater's handbook. But the sorrow felt performative, her primary emotion still seeming to be the discomfort of being caught. There was no talk of ending the affair, no desperate pleas for forgiveness, no real sense that she understood the depth of the wound she'd inflicted. It was more about her discomfort, her dilemma. By the early hours of the morning, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, an awful kind of exhaustion had set in. We were in a beautiful suite in paradise, and it felt like a tomb. Sleep was impossible for me. Nancy eventually drifted into a restless slumber on the far edge of the king-sized bed, a chasm of betrayal separating us more effectively than any physical distance. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What now? My initial, visceral urge was to confront David, to find his room, to drag him out, to, what? Beat him up? Cause a scene? As satisfying as that might have felt on a primal level, I knew it was a losing game. It would make me look unhinged, play into their hands perhaps. Nancy might even rush to his defense. No, my response had to be more considered, more effective. The seeds of a plan, or rather, the desire for a certain kind of outcome, began to take root. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about justice. It was about consequences. They had chosen to conduct their affair with a stunning lack of regard for me. They had brought it into my life, into our shared space, with breathtaking arrogance. They had made it my business in the most brutal way imaginable. So I decided I would make it theirs too. The first step was to maintain a facade, as difficult as that would be. If Nancy, and by extension David, thought I was collapsing, or that I was going to explode imminently, they might change their behavior, become more guarded, or she might even try to manage me with false promises. I needed them to feel secure, to continue their little charade, at least for a day or two. I needed to observe, to gather my thoughts, perhaps even to gather more leverage. The next morning, I was an actor playing the role of a devastated but controlled husband. I was quiet, withdrawn, but not overtly aggressive. Nancy seemed relieved by my subdued demeanor, perhaps mistaking it for resignation or a prelude to a civilized discussion about our future, one where she might still control the narrative. She suggested we talk, try to figure things out. I agreed, vaguely. I let her believe I was processing, grieving. And I was, but I was also thinking. The resort, this idyllic paradise, suddenly felt like a stage. And I was no longer content to be a mere spectator to their play. I decided I would rewrite the ending. My mind started working with a cold, methodical precision that surprised even me. David Kensington, senior partner from the London office. This information was key. People in senior positions, especially in large corporations, usually have a reputation to protect, a career they've carefully built. An inter-office affair, especially one conducted so recklessly during what amounted to a fake conference while his married lover was on an anniversary trip with her husband, might not sit well with the higher-ups or the company's HR department, particularly if it involved deceit and potential misuse of company time or resources if the conference was a complete sham he'd concocted. The first thing I did, while Nancy was in the shower, a long, contemplative shower, no doubt, was to use the hotel's Wi-Fi. I looked up David Kensington. It wasn't hard to find him. His professional bio was plastered all over the marketing firm's website, a distinguished-looking man in his late 40s or early 50s, silvering at the temples, a confident, slightly smug smile. There were articles he'd written, industry awards he'd won. A man with a carefully curated public image. An image, I suspected, that wouldn't be enhanced by the sordid details of his current vacation activities. I also looked up the company's code of conduct, often publicly available or inferable from their corporate responsibility statements. Most large firms have clauses about ethical behavior, conflicts of interest, and behavior that could bring the company into disrepute. An affair between a senior partner and a subordinate from another office, especially if it involved deception or impacted work, and Nancy's preoccupation certainly suggested her work was impacted, could very well be a breach of such policies. Then I thought about Nancy's career. She was ambitious. She'd worked hard to get where she was. How would her colleagues, her boss, react to knowing she'd not only cheated on her husband of 15 years but had done so in such a brazen and frankly stupid manner, involving a senior partner from another office, potentially jeopardizing her own professional standing? The plan began to solidify. It wasn't about violence or screaming matches on the beach. It was about exposure. It was about stripping away the secrecy that had allowed their affair to flourish. They wanted to act without consequences in their little bubble? I would burst that bubble. I decided I needed to see them together again, but this time, I needed to be prepared. I needed irrefutable proof, something more than just my word against theirs, especially if I was going to take this beyond personal confrontation. Later that day, Nancy, still treading carefully around me, suggested she needed some space to think, perhaps a walk on the beach alone. I nodded, a hollow feeling in my chest. Of course, I said, my voice flat. Take all the time you need. I knew where she was going, and I knew I had to follow. Not like a jealous maniac, but like a detective gathering evidence. I gave her a 20-minute head start, then casually strolled out, my phone in my pocket, camera ready. I took a different route, a more circuitous one that offered better vantage points of the beach area where I'd seen them the previous night. It didn't take long to find them. They were more discreet this time, sitting at a secluded beach bar at the far end of the resort, trying to blend in. But there they were. David had his arm around her shoulder, and they were laughing, sharing a drink, looking for all the world like any other happy couple on vacation. The sight still twisted a knife in my gut, but the anger was now channeled, focused. I stayed at a distance, partially hidden by some lush foliage, and I started filming. Short clips. A few photos. Nothing dramatic, just the two of them, clearly together, clearly intimate, in a public space. The quality wasn't Hollywood, but it was clear enough. It was proof. As I watched them, A wave of profound sadness washed over me. This was my wife, the woman I had vowed to love and cherish. And here she was, sharing laughter and intimacy with another man, while I skulked in the bushes like a private investigator in my own life. The absurdity of it, the tragedy of it, was almost overwhelming. But the sadness was quickly followed by a renewed sense of resolve. They had made their choices. Now, they would have to live with the consequences of those choices being brought into the light. My justice wouldn't be a fiery explosion of rage. It would be a cold, calculated dismantling of their secret world. I spent the rest of that day in a state of quiet preparedness. I made a few discreet inquiries at the front desk, a friendly chat about wanting to send a thank you note to a business acquaintance I believed was staying at the resort, and managed to confirm David Kensington's room number without raising too much suspicion. Knowledge is power, after all. My plan wasn't just about exposing the affair to their professional lives. It was also about how I would handle the immediate situation at the resort and the end of my marriage. Nancy seemed to be waiting for me to make a decision, to tell her what I wanted to do. She probably expected tears, arguments, perhaps a reluctant agreement to work through it, or a bitter but quiet separation. I don't think she ever anticipated that I would take control of the narrative so completely. The stage was set. The actors were in place. And I, the wronged husband, was about to step into the director's chair. The paradise they had sought for their illicit romance was about to become the setting for their public humiliation. The next morning, I told Nancy I needed to talk to her, and to David. Together. The color drained from her face. Together? Mark, I don't think that's a good idea. What's the point? Her voice was laced with panic. She clearly envisioned a messy, aggressive confrontation, probably hoping to manage me and David separately, to control the flow of information, the spin. The point, Nancy, I said, my voice calm but unyielding, is that this involves all three of us, doesn't it? You, me, and your associate. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. No more secrets, no more hiding. I could see the wheels turning in her head, searching for an escape route, an excuse. He won't want to, she stammered. It'll be awkward, confrontational. I'm sure it will be awkward, I replied, a humorless smile playing on my lips. But necessary. You can either invite him to our suite, or we can go to his. Or perhaps a more public forum. The lobby bar? Maybe. Your choice. But it's happening. The implied threat of a public scene did the trick. She knew I wasn't bluffing. Not anymore. There was a new steel in my voice she hadn't heard before. Reluctantly, she agreed to text David and ask him to come to our suite in an hour, under the pretext that she needed to talk to him urgently about our situation. She was clearly distressed, pacing the room, wringing her hands, while I sat, a model of unsettling composure, on the balcony, sipping a coffee I didn't taste, watching the waves. When David Kensington arrived, he had the slightly wary look of a man walking into an ambush, but he tried to project an air of nonchalant confidence. He was handsome, I suppose, in that generic, silver fox corporate raider kind of way. He nodded curtly at me, his eyes flicking between me and Nancy. Mark, I presume, he said, his accent clipped, British. Nancy said you wanted to chat. Chat? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Yes, David, that's a good word for it. Please, have a seat. I gestured to one of the armchairs. He sat, perching on the edge, ready to bolt. Nancy hovered near the doorway, looking like she wished the earth would swallow her whole. So, I began, keeping my tone even, almost conversational. Nancy tells me you two have become quite close. David glanced at Nancy, a silent question in his eyes. She just looked at the floor. We work together, he said, a little too smoothly. We found we have a good professional synergy. Professional synergy, I echoed, nodding slowly. Is that what you call carrying on an affair with another man's wife? Is that what you call coordinating your vacations so you can continue that synergy in a tropical paradise while her husband, who paid for the trip as an anniversary present, gets to find out by accident. His composure wavered, just a fraction. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Now, look here, he started, his voice taking on a harder edge. Whatever is going on between Nancy and me is a private matter. It stopped being a private matter, David, I interjected, my voice like ice, when you brought it into my marriage, into my vacation, and into this room. It became very much my business. And I have to say, for a senior partner in a presumably reputable global firm, your judgment seems remarkably poor. Or perhaps it's your ethics that are flexible. He bristled. I don't think my professional life has any bearing on this. Oh, I think it might, I said, leaning forward slightly. You see, I'm a great believer in transparency. And I imagine your CEO, Mr. Harrison, if I recall his name correctly from your company website, might be interested in how his senior partners spend their conference time, especially when it involves an employee from another office, leading to what could be described as a rather compromising situation. Companies tend to frown upon scandals that could tarnish their image, don't they? David's face, which had been attempting a sort of offended dignity, paled considerably. Nancy gasped softly. Mark, don't, she pleaded. I ignored her. And Nancy, I continued, turning to her, your own career. You've worked so hard. Imagine the office gossip, the HR inquiries, the awkwardness, all because you couldn't be honest, or at the very least, discreet. This is blackmail, David hissed, his eyes narrowing. Is it? I asked innocently. Or is it simply me, a wronged husband, contemplating sharing my unfortunate experiences with people who might have a vested interest in the integrity of their employees and partners? I have some rather compelling visual aids, by the way. A few photos, some video clips from the beach yesterday. Nothing X-rated, of course, just two colleagues enjoying some very close professional synergy in public. I'm sure the Ethics Committee, or perhaps the Daily Mail, would find it fascinating. The mention of the Daily Mail, a publication notorious for its appetite for scandals, seemed to hit David particularly hard. He looked like he was going to be sick. Nancy was openly crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. What do you want, Mark? She choked out. What I want, I said, standing up, is for you both to understand the gravity of what you've done. The disrespect, the betrayal. But more practically, David, I want you to pack your bags and be on the first flight out of Cancun. Your conference is over. Your synergy here is concluded. He stared at me, aghast. You can't be serious. Oh, I am deadly serious, I replied. If you are still at this resort by, let's say, 6 p.m. this evening, I will start making some phone calls. To your London office. To Mr. Harrison's personal assistant, whose contact details were surprisingly easy to find. I'll also be sending a lovely little package of information to your company's HR department and perhaps a few select media outlets. Your choice. David looked at Nancy, perhaps expecting her to intervene, to defend him, to negotiate. But she just stood there, defeated. He knew I had him. His career, his reputation, hung in the balance. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror and fury, largely directed at Nancy, I noted with grim satisfaction. She had brought this mess upon him, after all. You wouldn't, he said, but it was a weak protest. Try me, I said softly. 15 years of marriage, David. You helped her burn it to the ground. The least you can do is experience a little discomfort. He stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. No, I said. Outrageous was seeing my wife kissing you on the beach during our anniversary trip. This is just consequences. He glared at me, then at Nancy, a look of utter contempt on his face. You sorted this out, Nancy, he spat, his voice venomous. You told me he wouldn't be a problem. And with that, he turned and stormed out of the suite, slamming the door behind him. The silence he left behind was thick with Nancy's sobs. I didn't go to her. I didn't offer comfort. I just stood there, watching her. The first part of my plan had been executed. David Kensington was, I was fairly certain, already mentally packing his bags. But this wasn't just about him. It was about Nancy. It was about the end of us. And as for you, Nancy, I said, my voice devoid of the anger I'd shown David, now just filled with a profound weariness. We're done. This marriage is over. When we get back home, or rather, when I get back home, I'll be contacting a lawyer. I want a divorce. She looked up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Mark, please, she begged. Can't we talk about this? I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake. I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. No, Nancy. A mistake is taking a wrong turn or forgetting to pay a bill. This was a series of choices. Deliberate, calculated choices to deceive me, to betray me, to humiliate me. And now those choices have consequences. For you and for David. I walked over to my suitcase and opened it. I'll be checking out later today, I said, beginning to pack my clothes with methodical calm. I suggest you do the same. I don't care where you go or who you go with, but you won't be going back to our house. Consider this your official notice. Her face crumpled. This was clearly not the outcome she had envisioned. Perhaps she thought I would rage, then forgive, or that we'd have months of painful therapy and recriminations. She hadn't expected this swift, decisive amputation. The justice here wasn't just about chasing David away. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future free from her deceit. The satisfaction wasn't in her tears as much as a darker part of me might have felt a flicker of it. It was in the knowledge that I was taking control, drawing a line, and refusing to be a victim any longer. The paradise vacation had ended, but my journey back to myself was just beginning, and it would begin without her. Nancy didn't argue further about the divorce, not then. The fight seemed to have gone out of her, replaced by a stunned, hollow-eyed acceptance. Maybe the reality of my resolve, the cold finality in my voice, had finally pierced through her self-deception. Or maybe David's parting shot, blaming her for the mess, had shown her the true nature of the man she'd risked everything for. He hadn't fought for her, not really. He'd fought to protect himself, and when that failed, he'd lashed out at her. Some great love that was. I finished packing my bags in silence, a grim, methodical process. Each folded shirt, each pair of pants, felt like a step away from the life we had shared and towards an unknown, uncertain future. There was no satisfaction in it, only a deep, aching sadness, a mourning for the 15 years I couldn't get back, for the trust that had been irrevocably shattered. I booked a new flight home for that evening, a different airline, a different time. I couldn't bear the thought of potentially being on the same plane as her, or even David, if he was indeed scrambling to leave. I needed a clean break, starting immediately. When I was done packing, I looked at Nancy. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall, the picture of desolation. A part of me, a deeply buried, foolish part, still felt a pang of something akin to pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of her betrayal, the calculated cruelty of it. I'll leave the details of the divorce to my lawyer, I said, my voice flat. You'll be hearing from them. I expect your cooperation in making this as swift and uncomplicated as possible, given the circumstances. She nodded mutely, still not looking at me. Our house, she finally whispered. What about our things? The house is in my name primarily, if you recall, from before we were married, I stated, a fact that suddenly felt very significant. My lawyer will advise on the division of marital assets. But you will need to find somewhere else to stay. Nancy, I won't have you in the house when I return. Pack what you need immediately. You can arrange for the rest later, through our lawyers. This was harsh, I knew. But the thought of her being in our home, surrounded by our shared memories, while I was reeling from her infidelity, was unbearable. It needed to be a clean cut. I called the bellhop to take my luggage. As I waited for him, I took one last look around the suite, the opulent room that was meant to be a haven for us, now a monument to our ruin. The beautiful view from the balcony, the jacuzzi tub we never used, the king-sized bed that had become a battlefield. It all felt tainted. When the bellhop arrived, I walked out without a backward glance, without another word to Nancy. There was nothing left to say. The immediate aftermath was a blur of logistical details and suppressed emotion. Checking out of the resort, the awkward taxi ride to the airport alone, the sterile anonymity of the departure lounge. Every happy couple I saw, every family laughing, felt like a personal affront. I kept my phone off, not wanting to see any messages from Nancy or from anyone else for that matter. I needed to insulate myself, to create a protective cocoon until I was back on home turf and ready to face the fallout. The flight itself was long and lonely. I stared out the window at the clouds, my mind replaying the events of the last few days, searching for missed signs, for clues I should have picked up on. Had I been a bad husband? Unattentive? Boring? The self-doubt gnawed at me. But then the anger would resurface, the sheer audacity of her actions. It wasn't just the affair. It was the calculated deception, the invitation of her lover to our anniversary trip. That was a different level of cruelty. Back home, the house felt unnervingly empty, yet suffocatingly full of her presence. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom. Max, our golden retriever, was overjoyed to see me, his enthusiasm a brief, welcome respite from the oppressive gloom. But even he seemed to sense that something was wrong, that Nancy was missing, and he kept looking towards the door, whining softly. The first few days were the hardest. I moved on autopilot. I contacted a highly recommended divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, who listened patiently to my story, her expression hardening as I recounted the details of the Cancun trip. She assured me that Nancy's flagrant infidelity, especially the circumstances surrounding it, would likely play a significant role in the divorce settlement, particularly concerning alimony and division of assets, depending on our state laws and any pre-existing agreements. I told her about the house. She confirmed that my premarital ownership would heavily favor me. Then came the difficult part, telling people. I started with my closest friend, Tom, who listened in stunned silence before erupting in a string of curses directed at Nancy and David. His outrage on my behalf was oddly comforting. Telling my parents was even harder. They had loved Nancy like a daughter. My mother cried. My father, a man of few words, simply put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You'll get through this, son. You're stronger than you think." Nancy, true to my directive, didn't return to the house. She texted me a few days later, a timid, pleading message asking if we could talk, if there was any chance for reconciliation. I didn't reply directly. I forwarded it to Ms. Albright, who advised me to keep all communication channeled through our legal representatives. It was cold, but necessary. I needed to protect myself emotionally and legally. News about David Kensington trickled back to me indirectly. Tom, who had a friend working in a vaguely related industry in London, did some digging. Apparently, Kensington had indeed made a hasty departure from Cancun. There were rumors circulating within their company about a personal emergency and an abruptly curtailed vacation. No official scandal had broken, not yet, but the seeds of doubt, the whispers, had begun. My package of information remained unsent, my finger hovering over the metaphorical launch button. Ms. Albright had advised caution, suggesting that such actions could potentially complicate the divorce proceedings if seen as malicious or an attempt to extort. However, the threat had been effective enough with David. For Nancy, the consequences were more immediate and personal. She had lost her husband, her home, and her carefully constructed life. I heard through the legal channels that she was staying with her sister, her professional life in disarray as she tried to manage the internal fallout at her company. While I hadn't directly contacted her workplace, The sheer fact of our sudden, acrimonious split, especially after an anniversary trip, would undoubtedly raise eyebrows and start whispers. Affairs, especially with senior partners, rarely stay secret forever in corporate environments. The days turned into weeks. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a persistent, dull ache. There were good days where I felt a sense of liberation, a glimpse of a future unburdened by deceit. And there were bad days where the loneliness was a heavy cloak and the bitterness threatened to consume me. I threw myself into work, into exercise, into reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. I started therapy, something I never thought I'd do, but Ms. Albright had gently suggested it, and I found it surprisingly helpful to talk to an impartial third party, to unpack the emotional baggage of 15 years and the trauma of the betrayal. One evening, about a month after Cancun, I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, a painful but necessary step in reclaiming my space, my life. I found a photo album from our early years together. Nancy and I, young, smiling, full of hope and love. The contrast between that happy, innocent couple and the wreckage of our present was stark. A wave of grief washed over me, raw and intense. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just pain, it was a letting go. A recognition that the woman in those photos, the marriage I had cherished, was truly gone, and no amount of anger or regret could bring it back. The revenge, if you could call it that, hadn't been about fiery destruction. It had been about a quiet assertion of self-worth, about drawing boundaries, about ensuring that their actions had tangible, unavoidable consequences. David's panicked retreat, Nancy's displacement, and the implosion of her double life, those were the direct results of their choices, choices I had simply refused to let them sweep under the rug. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own. The divorce proceedings moved with a surprising swiftness, largely because Nancy, on the advice of her own somewhat beleaguered lawyer, chose not to contest most of my terms. Perhaps the fear of further exposure or the sheer indefensibility of her actions made her compliant. Ms. Albright was brilliant, ensuring the settlement was more than fair to me, considering the circumstances. The house was mine, unequivocally. Our joint assets were divided in a way that heavily favored me, a quiet acknowledgement of the emotional and financial toll of her affair, the wasted anniversary trip being just one small, symbolic part of it. There was no alimony for Nancy. Her affair, and the manner in which it was conducted, essentially nullified any claim she might have had. It was a harsh outcome for her, I suppose, but as Ms. Albright pointedly remarked, "You reap what you sow, Mr. Henderson." David Kensington, as far as I could tell, had managed to keep his career intact, at least on the surface. No public scandal erupted. Perhaps my threat was enough to ensure he'd never be so reckless again. Or perhaps his company preferred to handle such embarrassments internally, quietly sidelining him or ensuring his advancement prospects dimmed. I didn't pursue it further. My primary goal had been to get him out of my life and away from Nancy during that critical time, and to ensure he understood the repercussions of his actions. In that, I had succeeded. His real punishment would be living with the knowledge of his own tawdry behavior and the fact that he had allowed himself to be so easily manipulated by Nancy and then so easily cowed by me. For Nancy, the fallout was more comprehensive. She had lost her marriage, her home, and a significant portion of her financial security. Her relationship with David, from what little I heard, had disintegrated almost immediately after the Cancun debacle. His parting words to her in our suite had probably been the death knell for whatever fantasies she had been entertaining. I learned indirectly that she had eventually moved into a small apartment and was struggling to rebuild her professional life. The whispers at her firm, though never officially addressed, had apparently made her position untenable, and she'd eventually sought employment elsewhere, a step down the career ladder. There was a grim sort of justice in that. though I found it brought me little joy, only a profound sense of waste. The most satisfying moment of justice, if I can call it that, wasn't a grand, dramatic event. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, about 6 months after Cancun, when I signed the final divorce papers in Ms. Albright's office. As I put down the pen, a wave of relief washed over me, so profound it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was the feeling of a heavy burden finally being lifted. I was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the constant ache of betrayal. Free to start again. The months that followed were about rebuilding. I redecorated the house, purging the last remnants of Nancy's presence, making it my own space. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I focused on my health, both physical and mental. Therapy continued to be a vital outlet, helping me process the grief, the anger, and the lingering self-doubt. It taught me to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too blindly. It taught me that her betrayal was about her failings, not mine. I learned that it was okay to be angry, but not okay to let that anger define me or consume my future. I also learned the importance of boundaries, of recognizing red flags, and of valuing my own worth. The experience had undeniably changed me. I was more cautious now, perhaps a little more cynical about love and relationships. The easy optimism of my youth was gone, replaced by a more seasoned, realistic perspective. But I wasn't broken. In fact, in many ways, I felt stronger, more resilient. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and had not only survived but had navigated it with a dignity and resolve I hadn't known I possessed. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing I had handled an unbearable situation without resorting to violence or losing my own integrity, instead using my intellect and a measured response to ensure that those who wronged me faced appropriate consequences. I focused on the legal and reputational leverage I had, rather than stooping to their level. My revenge was not a fiery explosion, but a cold, calculated dismantling of their secret world, ensuring the truth came to light in a way that protected me and exposed them. It was about ensuring their actions had tangible, unavoidable repercussions in their professional and personal lives, all while I maintained the moral high ground. This approach, I realized, was far more powerful and lasting than any momentary outburst of rage could ever have been. It was about strategic justice, not just emotional reaction. Looking back now, a couple of years down the line, life is different. It's quieter in some ways, but also more authentic. The scars are still there, no doubt. Betrayal of that magnitude leaves an indelible mark. There are moments, unexpected triggers, a song on the radio, a glimpse of a couple that reminds me of us in happier times, that can still bring a fleeting pang of sadness, a ghost of the pain. But those moments are fewer and farther between. The dominant feeling now is one of peace and a hard-won sense of self. I never did send that package of information about David Kensington to his CEO or the media. Ms. Albright was right. The threat had been enough, and escalating it further after he'd complied with my demand to leave Cancun might have felt more like vengeance than justice, potentially complicating my own goals for a clean divorce. Knowing he'd faced a measure of fear and consequence, and that his affair with Nancy had spectacularly imploded, was sufficient. His real punishment was the loss of his carefully constructed self-image and whatever respect Nancy might have had for him. As for Nancy, our paths have not crossed since those awful days in Cancun, save for the sterile interactions through our lawyers. I hear snippets about her life through mutual acquaintances who haven't yet fully picked a side or who simply can't resist a bit of gossip. She's still working, still single, apparently. I don't wish her ill, not anymore. The anger has largely faded, replaced by a kind of detached pity. She made her choices, and she is living with the consequences. That, in itself, is a form of justice. My own life has moved forward in ways I couldn't have imagined back then. I sold the old house about a year after the divorce. Despite redecorating, it held too many ghosts. I bought a smaller place, closer to the city, a fresh start in every sense. Max is still with me, older now, a little slower, but still my faithful companion. His unquestioning loyalty was a balm during those dark days. I've even started dating again, cautiously. It's not easy. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken and hard to rebuild. But I've met some interesting people, and I'm reminded that not everyone is deceitful, that genuine connections are still possible. I'm more discerning, more aware of what I want and what I won't tolerate. The experience, as painful as it was, taught me invaluable lessons about myself. I learned that I am far more resilient than I ever gave myself credit for. I learned the importance of self-respect and of not being afraid to stand up for myself, even when it's incredibly difficult. I learned that while you can't control other people's actions, you can control your own reactions and how you choose to move forward. The revenge, if I can even call it that, wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, my own peace. It was about ensuring that their recklessness didn't go unchecked, that there were real-world repercussions for their choices. The quiet satisfaction came from seeing them face the consequences they had so arrogantly tried to avoid, and from my own ability to walk away with my dignity intact, focusing on justice rather than mere emotional retribution. For anyone out there going through something similar, the shock, the pain, the disbelief of betrayal, know this. It feels like the end of the world, but it isn't. It's the end of a world, the one you thought you knew. But it's also the beginning of a new one you get to build on your own terms. The healing process is not linear. There will be good days and bad days. Be kind to yourself. Seek support from friends, from family, from professionals. Don't let bitterness consume you, but don't shy away from your anger either. It's a natural response to being wronged. Channel it constructively. What happened to me forced me to reevaluate everything I believed about love, trust, and commitment. It was a brutal education, but one that ultimately made me stronger, more self-aware, and, I hope, a better man. The paradise I sought in Cancun turned out to be a mirage, but in its place, I eventually found a more enduring kind of peace, one built on the solid foundation of self-respect and resilience. The old me, the naive, trusting husband, is gone. But the man who emerged from that wreckage is someone I'm still getting to know, and for the most part, I think I like him better. He knows his worth. Looking back, I realize I lost a part of myself, but I also found something stronger. If you've ever been betrayed, know this. You're not alone, and healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself.